I'm here today with Mari Fitz-Wynn. Mari is a nonfiction author, novelist, and sought-after speaker whose talents have carried her across the globe. Her works include Take Heart, 26 Steps to a Healthy Homeschool, Connect the Dots, and most recently her debut poetry collection, Rise Up, Poems of Protest, Poems of Praise. That's her third book to be published. In 2018, she received a prestigious United Arts Professional Development Literary Grant for her upcoming novel, The Secret of Faith, to be published in 2023. In April, she was honored during the National Poetry Month with one of her poems selected to appear in the Experience Poetry 30 Days of Poems by 30 North Carolina writers. Mari has written numerous articles for a variety of women's magazines and her home state's Home Education magazine. She's written litanies and poems for years. Several of them have been used through Engage Worship in the UK. An editor and writing coach with 25 years experience, she is the founder and managing editor for Faith Journey Publishing, a company dedicated to creating pathways to publishing for women of color over the age of 45. You can learn more at faithjourneypublishing.com. So Mari, thanks so much for joining us, and congratulations on all the work that you've accomplished.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, it's really, really great to meet you. Maybe you can kind of tell us more about your background and what else you would like people to know about you.
Well, my story is probably not untypical in terms of writing. I always loved to write, and it's a blessing, and it's exciting to find myself here so many years down the road as a writer, an experienced writer at this point. And it's exciting. I won't say it's a dream come true, but it's been a reality in the work for a long time. I have 5 boys, 1 girl, and we homeschooled for at least 20 years. My husband was the mathematician, so happily he took over that part. Math is not necessarily my strong suit. But along the experience and journey of writing, Brian, really, there was always a challenge to either find someone to publish a manuscript, or looking for suitable articles, etc., etc. And most recently, what has become a dream come true is the Faith Journey Publishing Company, which you mentioned, being able to offer what we call a pathway to publishing for women of color who are over the age of 45. What we found in our research and statistics is that older women in general might have a bit of a challenge in finding a publisher for their work, but older women of color, it almost quadruples in their ability to find a publisher and someone who'll work with them at the older stage of life. Yeah.
Well, I started Writing for Your Life and the other things after that at either age 60 or later. So I was thinking about like writing a book about a diary of an old entrepreneur. I don't know if I ever will that. But, obviously, you just started Faith Journey Publishing last year, was it?
Yes.
So relatively, not late in life, but not exactly early in life either. So can you talk a little bit about what's it like, from your perspective to be, an entrepreneur starting a company at this stage of your life?
Sure. Well, I've been an entrepreneur for many years, self-employed. I guess I have that entrepreneurial leaning, and this is just my most recent venture. But because I am an older woman and understand the challenges, I think that it's a challenge that I want to rise to. I enjoy the energy and the creative ideas of younger writers. Have a lot of friends who are younger writers under the age of 45. But what we're looking for, and what I've come to appreciate, is the experience of the journey that an older woman has had, you know, the joys, the grief, maybe the sorrow, the excitement, maybe taking that journey alone as single all of her life, or with family, you know, with losses, with gains. And I can resonate with many of the stories. So I think that that's the one thing that I have enjoyed working with some of the authors that have approached us with their projects.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So before we get to the new book that you've written, can we talk about your previous books? What would you like to share with folks about those?
Sure. Well, the first book, as you mentioned, the Take Heart book, 26 Steps to a Healthy Homeschool. That was my first book, and really it is a compilation of many of the articles that I wrote for one of the state's home education organizations. They have a magazine, and I just thought I would compile them all together alphabetically, and that's what the book is about, my experience as a homeschool mom, home educator, some of it's my children's experiences. And it's a fairly quick read, just little snippets of homeschool life, how to teach and not make it such a random situation, or fun things to do on the first day of school, different ways to celebrate unity within your school, within the family, some of the not so wonderful days of teaching, and encouragement for new homeschool parents and for vets alike, because you know, you're new, you want to learn as much about home education as possible, and sometimes you've been teaching for a long time and you're starting to feel a little burned out, and there is a chapter on burnout. And so it's a lift, I hope, to those who have been homeschooling for a long time.
Well, it sounds like it'd be very helpful.
I've had some great reviews on it, and I hope that it is helpful and a blessing to moms and dads. The second book is more like a homeschool challenge. It challenges parents to a different way to work with their children on a variety of subjects, teaching them about how their students learn and how they teach. So your teaching approach and the child's learning approach, and how to make them, help them be compatible. There's exercises on listening, teaching your children to not only listen to directives, but listening during a story time, or listening when instructions are given, so that they become better note takers as they grow up and go into their high school years. So that was a fun book too, and it's called Connect the Dots. And really, it's encouraging parents to connect the dots. This is what you're teaching this is what you want your child to learn. Here's a great way to do it. And you're making connections within the family.
Very cool. Very cool. So
Yeah.
as I mentioned, the new book that you're coming out with is called Rise Up, Poems of Protest, Poems of Praise. How did that book come about?
Well, it's a collection of poems written by my grandfather and myself. My grandfather published 3 volumes of poetry back in the late 30s, early 40s. And due to an illness in the early 80s, his copyright expired, and no one really, caught on to that, paid any attention to it. And as time went on, I ran across his book, just somewhere on the bookshelf, looking at it, and I thought, oh, these poems should be republished. The book should be republished. And I talked to an aunt about it, and she agreed, yeah, that's a great idea. But then life happened, and we didn't move on it. So back in 2020, with the murder of George Floyd and pandemic and all that was happening in the world, his poetry came back to my mind. And I felt that God was really directing me to do something a bit more creative than to just republish his book. And the creativity was to merge our poetry together into one volume. And I talked to my editor about it, and she thought it was a great idea. And so, as they say, the rest is history. I decided to pursue a book with both our poetry volumes together.
Wow, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Not many people can do something like that with a grandparent.
It was quite an experience for me. I knew him as a child, and then, they lived in Iowa, and I grew up in Denver. And then, you grow up and you go on, and they're your grandparents. But rereading his poetry and selecting which poems would go into the book, I felt like I was learning something new about him, getting to know him in a different way, perhaps more intimately as a writer, because now we have this thing in common, that we're writers. It's not just, granddaughter, grandparent, but now we're both writers, poets. And so it has been a very rewarding experience, I'll tell you.
I can totally imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who do you think would be most attracted to the book?
I'm sorry?
Who do you think would be most attracted to the book?
Who do I think would be most attracted to the book? People who are interested in writings concerning social justice, people who are interested in examining, reflecting on God's creation, and people who love the world. The book title, Poems of Protest, Poems of Praise, it is not all just in protesting a thing, but also helping us to have a consciousness of the world around us. And so there are poems in it about nature, poems about life, poems about worship. So I believe that it's a book that Christians would be strongly attracted to, but I think anyone who loves poetry and good writing would enjoy reading this book.
It seems like there's a shortage of poetry books these days. A lot of the traditional publishers that I work with don't publish poetry any longer. There's some very specialized publishing houses that do poetry, but it doesn't seem to be as mainstream, maybe, as what it used to be. So maybe there's more opportunity for, the books that do get published to get a broader audience.
Well, I hope so. And I have to agree with you, and it is a shame because uh, sometimes I think people think that poetry books are going to be dry or, maybe boring or not really hit the markers for them. But there are some prolific uh, poets and poetry being written today. Yeah, I'd like to see more of it.
So looking forward, I mentioned in the introduction that you're working on a novel, The Secret of Faith. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's based during the early stages of the Great Depression. And there is an African American community, farming community. It's out in Kansas. And there is a situation that comes up within a family where the husband becomes an unwitting part of a journey over to Ethiopia. And so it's his story of the journey to Ethiopia and his wife's story of managing the farm during the Depression.
Wow.
And it is based on learning the secret of faith, what faith really is.
Very interesting. Kind of historical novel.
It's historical fiction, loosely based on some of my family stories.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
So let's go back to Faith Journey Publishing for a moment.
Right.
Are there particular types of books that you're looking for?
Yeah, thank you for asking. We are looking for women who write Christian-themed nonfiction, fiction, historical fiction, memoirs, and self-help books. We have a couple of authors who have also pitched some study guides, kind of like Bible studies, not necessarily Bible studies, I'd say workbooks. So we're somewhat limited in that area. Right now we're not doing YA, but we are looking for short stories as well. We have had, and we'll have another short story contest in the fall, just to give authors or emerging writers an opportunity to get their stories out.
So would you categorize Faith Journey Publishing more as a traditional publisher, a hybrid publisher, or something else?
It's so there's a category that's traditional / author subsidized, and that's pretty much where we are. We're a boutique publishing company in that we specifically and only work again with women of color over the age of 45, but we do have a royalty system, and there are a la carte items that an author can select in the production of their book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's all wonderful to hear. And as I mentioned, the name of Mari's new book is Rise Up, Poems of Protest, Poems of Praise. And her website for Faith Journey Publishing is faithjourneypublishing.com. So Mari, congratulations on all that work, and thanks for sharing it with us today.
Thank you. And Brian, thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, it's our pleasure.